Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating Q&A live. So today, what we're going to do over the next hour, we do this at least once a month, sometimes more as schedule allows. But the basic premise of what we do here is we're going to sit here for about the next hour-ish, depending. And you're going to ask your questions. So if you're joining us live, welcome. Glad to have you along on the hobby journey. And if you throw your questions over in the comments, which is, I think, on that side, vis-a-vis me, that sounds right, then I'll see them and read them and respond, and we'll go from there. I'll do my best to answer any hobby-related questions asked. I can't promise I know everything, but I promise I'll try to share everything that I can. So there you go. That's the basic idea. Obviously, this is something fun I like to do. I enjoy answering these questions. I hope it helps people out. If you're watching this not live, if you're watching this later, you can always feel free to drop your comments down in the, or your questions down in the comments below, and I'll answer them there. No big deal. Happy to help any way that I can. So, yes, that doesn't help. Somebody said we're over here. I don't know which over here is, but I think it's that side. Somebody tell me if I'm pointing the right direction. There you go. But at any rate, feel free to ask any hobby-related questions you've got, and we'll see what we can do to get them answered. While I'm waiting on the first questions rolling in, what I was working on today was some of these. Where are we at here? Here we go. I was working on some of these like Tzeentch sorcerer dudes. These guys are really fun. These are like the Tzeentch sorcerers from 40K. Really fun little guys. I think they're really great models. They did a heck of a job with them. So it's these guys. Ah. There we go. There's the box. Sorry. Those guys. Cool figs. All right. So let's see what we've got as far as questions go. All right. So Joe says he's got a question about painting the empty half of a bottle of liquid. What colors and where do the lights and darks fall to achieve it? Sure. So, I mean, I have a video on it. So my first recommendation would be go watch the video I have on painting liquid in bottles. But the short answer is it should be darker. It should be a darker version of whatever color the liquid is in your bottle. And tilting toward very dark, like near black, but infused and influenced by that color. And what you're effectively painting when you paint a bottle is sky earth non-metallic metal. It's the same theory. It's because the water is creating a pseudo horizon line. So like imagine this is the bottle. Okay. And your water line is here. Okay. That's my water line. Then what's going to happen is from here, this is going to be the darkest point of the whole thing, coming down to light right here. You're going to have a bright reflection line on the edge of the liquid, and then it's going to be the darkest here at the top of the liquid, going down to the light version of the liquid here. Now, the difference with glass is that you also then need to paint the reflection of the glass if it's a glass bottle. So you generally want to run like a reflection line that follows the curve of it down here. Maybe it has a dot in it, something like that. You can play around with your reflections. Glass reflects in lots of interesting ways, but something that shows, you can also do a sort of two reflection line. I see a lot of people do this where they'll kind of have it run like this shape. So they bring a light line down, dot it, run a line across the bottom, like around the edge of the glass, and then back up here. Because what you're effectively catching there is the reflected light. That's what that little light line is meaning. Because light comes down, hits the glass, reflects, hits the ground, comes back up, and creates the small line. There you go. All right. Okay. William Furby says, using a wet palette and Vallejo glaze medium, how do you know that your paint is thin enough? Because it looks like the level of thinness you want. I mean, I don't want to give like a completely obtuse answer, but does it look thin enough to you? I mean, I'll tell you how I do it. I keep paint on the back of my thumb on this glove, and then I test my glaze over top of it. So if I'm thinning out a glaze and I want to know if is it the right thinness, I'll get some on my brush and I'll spread it out. And then I run it over that white paint. And I see how much of that white paint I can still see. Did it do what I needed it to do? If the answer is yes, it looks right, cool, I'm good to go. But the real answer is test it first. Is it covering the brighter color you want it to cover in the right way? All right, let's see. Well, thank you, Pierre. That's very much appreciated, sir. All right. Joseph Unger says, any tips for speed painting an army of 615 millimeter soldiers? My brother bought 600 World War II minis and asked me to paint them. Oh boy, not really. I hate anything smaller than 28 millimeter. Personal tastes. It's nothing wrong with it. I know a lot of people do. The short answer is you can use higher contrast. You can use a lot of like tips, like my speed painting video will work pretty well on it. Hey, sorry, my dog is under my feet. Will work pretty well on it because you can, the detail is so small that you can do things like zenithal prime the whole thing, dry brush the whole thing, and then just throw some washes down, and it will probably look pretty good. So, you know, higher contrast is good. Things like inks and stuff like that will work really well. That's a lot of figures. I can't even imagine. That sounds like a nightmare to me. But good on you. You're a good brother. Okay. What ink set would you recommend buying as a starter set? What a great question. Right on the back of that one. Boy, that's timed well. Vallejo Gaming. This is your starter ink set. There are a lot of good ink sets. This is not my favorite ink set. That's not why I'm recommending it. Okay. My favorite ink sets are other things I'll talk about in a moment, but they're more complicated to use. This is very user-friendly. The colors are pretty much exactly what they look like on the bottle. It comes with a wide selection of very basic and useful colors. They're great through your airbrush. They're great to add to paints to thin them. They're great to use on their own. It does what it says on the tin. They're high pigment. They accomplish what you want them to do. And they're relatively cheap. You can get a good set of like 8 Vallejo Gamings for like 20 bucks. Great investment. I still use them all the time. And there's nothing bad about them. That's why I would recommend them. They're the most straightforward. You know, from there, where do you go? You go into your Daler-Rowney FW inks. These are a little more tricky to use because they are super highly pigmented. Their strength is very high. You have to learn how to properly thin them and work with them. But these are great. Fantastic. The big part of any smooth white is that like the Daler-Rowney FW. But you buy those more or less individually. You can get sets, but the sets aren't as useful because the individual colors you want are like white, Payne's gray, and sepia. And then the Scale 75 ink tensity set. The Scale 75 ink tensity set's amazing. It has several colors in it that I find invaluable. Their black is wonderful for doing shading on true metallic metal. The chestnut's wonderful for shading on true metallic metal gold. Inktense wood is a magic sorcerer, like a weird sorcery color that if you put over like a white to black dry brushed zenithal type of thing, it will just instantly make it look like wood, like instantaneously. It will just look like wood. And then the red and the yellow are great for like when you want to do super bright intensity yellow and red. You just add them into your paint because they're so vibrant. All right. Zab Asylum says, when you paint a gem, I see you use a different color for the shadow. How do you choose it? Whatever looks right, whatever looks darker. I don't think a lot about that kind of stuff. I just kind of, I hate to give answers like that, but I don't have some particular way that I really think about it. Oftentimes in the shadow color, I will tend to use Payne's gray, which is this blue-black. Like it works really well for the deepest shadows of gems in cold colors. So that is to say, like if I'm doing a purple, blue, or a green gem, which are very common gem colors, I will tend to use Payne's gray as a mix into the deepest shadow. But I pick two colors that I think look relatively nice as the sort of lighted end of the gem and the shadowed end of the gem and go. The biggest thing you want to avoid, if I can try to give some useful advice there besides do what you feel, is Don't pick two colors that drift in opposite directions. This is especially challenging when it comes to things like these colors like purple and green. So what I mean by that is, like, let's take purple, for example. You can be a dead in the middle purple, or you can drift into blue purple, or you can drift into red purple, right? Getting closer to magenta and red purple, or getting closer to maybe like a more violet or something, or whatever in the blue purple. Don't pick two opposing forces there, right? Like, don't pick your dark color as a blue infused purple and your light color as a pink or red infused purple. That will make the gem look like it clashes. Other than that, just any sort of darker version and lighter version of the same color, and you're good to go. Okay. Slippery Squid. Some of my scale 75 paints are drying into jelly-like blobs on the wet palette. Any idea why? I'm sure there's a couple potential answers for that. The most obvious one would be your wet palette isn't wet enough. So it's not wicking up enough water. Scale 75, if you're talking, I assume you're talking about the actual primary paint, is a gel-based paint. And so it is going to naturally hold a shape and be a little bit more water resistant when it's just sitting there all together. A good trick is you can take the back end, like once you put your paint onto your wet palette, if you've got something like that, take the back end of like a brush you don't care about having paint on the back end of. Assume this is your wet palette and you put your dollop of paint there. Take the back end of your brush and just kind of push it down in a little bit. Don't use the bristles, because then you're just asking to get paint up in the ferrule and ruin a brush. Just use the back end and push it down some and kind of swirl it a little. Not crazy. You're not trying to get the whole thing flat. You're not trying to push the whole thing down. No. Okay. Light few touches. Like literally, this is what I would do. Do. Cool. With a fair amount of pressure. Okay. Because by pushing into the wet palette, you're forcing the osmosis. And you'll get a little bit more water wicked up into your paint, and it'll hopefully become a little more, it should stay a little more fluid. So that's my advice on that. Okay. Let's see. Looking for the next questions. Josh Saunders, good morning, 3 a.m. from Australia. Hey, Josh. Okay. Matt Capelli, where's a good place to buy Vallejo paints? I don't like ordering them online because I like to see the actual colors. I live in Philadelphia, so hopefully you have a good recommendation. Oh boy, man. Gamers Haven. I think they have it. It's in like Phoenix. I'm teaching a class, or like Phoenix something, whatever the suburb Phoenix something named is. I'm sorry, I don't even remember. I think northwest side of the city. Sounds right. It's a really cool store. I'm teaching a class there in February, and I believe they probably have it. I don't know enough. I know there is a game store sort of downtown, or I don't know if it's downtown really, but it's not probably downtown, but there's a game store kind of down by like 3rd Street, down not too far away from like where Independence Hall is, but I don't know if they carry Vallejo or not. I didn't look when I walked in there one time when I was there. Okay. Rebecca says, is zenithal highlighting only useful if you're glazing? No. Zenithal highlighting is how you should paint every figure ever as a start. That's not true. 98% of your figures should be zenithal highlighted. There are exceptions. The reason look, your paint picks up the colors underneath, regardless. Acrylic paint is transparent. That's why we paint with it. Okay, because it shows the colors underneath. So even when people say, well, it completely destroyed my zenithal, I don't, first of all, I don't believe you. Sad, because I'm willing to bet if I painted over straight black and then I painted the same color over zenithal, you'd see a difference. Put red over straight black and tell me it's not easier, or tell me it's not harder, sorry, than putting red over a zenithal. Having a zenithal neutral tone, because what zenithal really means is that the majority of the area, the surface area you're painting, becomes a sort of neutral gray. And then there's some highlights preserved and some shadows preserved. And going over a neutral tone is always better than painting over black. Like if I can't get people to zenithal, then at the very least, prime your figures in gray or brown or ivory, some neutral tone color that's going to preserve something truer, especially on highly transparent colors, oranges, yellows, reds, flesh tones, etc. Right? But no, it's always useful. Even if it's only weakly preserving the color, it's still helping. So like a good example of this is if you ever watch if you ever watch Banshee paint, he always starts with a pretty decent value sketch, like a zenithal style value sketch. And then he's slapping paint around like crazy. And he's certainly covered over his value sketch to some degree, but he still uses that value sketch as a guide of how to paint. And it's helping the true color come through, even if it's only weakly. Your subconscious is still aware of the difference because each of those paints is weakly transparent, and each one, the light passes through differently and reflects back at a slightly different speed to your eye. Now, that's impossible for you to consciously be aware of, right? Like we're talking milliseconds of difference, but it appears richer. If you've ever looked at a figure that looked richer in tone, it's because there's more volume to it. When people say they want to increase the volumes, that means like they're increasing that stack of depth of colors. And zenithal can be a good first step to that by giving you that initial sketch. So that's my answer. I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. Yes, it is incredibly useful if you're glazing, but I start every piece with a zenithal 98%. Like there are exceptions. We can talk about them if you want, but for the most part, it's just easier to say it's an all the time rule. Okay. John Gallant, what's the best way to get faster but not sacrifice too much quality? Deliberately practice speed. Deliberate practice. People often say, like, just practice. Practice isn't enough. You can practice for years and not get any better. I highly disagree with the statement, practice makes you better. That is a hollow statement. If you just keep painting the same way and the same armies and using the same techniques, you will never get better. I don't care how you practice. I mean, like, some things will slightly improve. You'll subconsciously understand like your brush control a little better. You'll probably get more accurate with how you place the paint, but you're not really going to see any masked or marked improvements. So practice alone isn't enough. Deliberate practice. This is a very big thing talked about in a lot of like athletic circles now, right? For people who train for the Olympics. People who train for the Olympics, if you want to be like a, some Olympic level athlete, you don't just do the thing forever. Right? Like you just don't do the one thing you're trying to do. You do lots of different things. You deliberately practice elements of the thing you're trying to do. And you train and work that one component and then the next. Painting's the same way. So the deliberate way is the way to improve your speed without sacrificing quality is deliberately practice that thing. Set a time limit for yourself. 2 hours. Paint a figure. And look at where you fell down in quality when you're done. Don't try to fix it. Look at where you fell down. What didn't you achieve? What did you fail at? Are your blends not smooth enough? Is your contrast not high enough? Is your paint not clean enough? Pick one of those things you failed on. Do that same test again and focus on that one thing. Just that one thing. Don't care about failing at the rest. Just focus on that one thing. Then do it again with another one and another thing. And eventually by deliberately practicing all the individual elements, you will be able to combine them quicker. Deliberately practice your individual techniques to get better at them. So like, here's a great example. There was an artist I was talking to who, when he took his portfolio in, said that he sucked at drawing hands. Okay. Fair enough. So he drew nothing but hands for 6 months. Like, dozens a day. That was it. Just drew hands, different shapes, different positions, different angles, male and female hands, different ages. By the time he was done, he was pretty good at hands. Ben Cantor, who is a great artist and a really nice guy, who did the bust I did recently of the Tomb King. He wanted to improve his bust painting. So he went out and got 40 cheap busts, and he painted nothing but busts for a few months, just one after the other. And every time he looked at where he failed and fell down and then tried to improve that thing on the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. So focus on your deliberate practice with an eye towards speed and and where you fell down, trying to keep that speed, right? And you can get that improvement. Okay. Daniel N. Simple wet palette question. I am having issues with the paper curling at the ends and making the paint run. What am I doing wrong? It has to be super simple. Sure. Your paper's going off the sponge. It's that easy. Like most of the time your paper will curl when you first put it down and it touches water and it wants to pull together. But I mean, I assume you smooth it out initially. Okay. So if that happens, then, you know, you just like when you first put it down, you smooth it out. You smooth it out a couple times and it'll stay stuck. Now, if it curls after that, it's because you got dry paper on the side, which means you've got paper going off the side of the sponge and it's going to curl. So cut smaller pieces of paper and make sure the paper is contained within the sponge. That should solve it. Could also be that your wet palette isn't wet enough. That's always a possibility, but if the first thing you say is, no, my piece of paper is completely contained within the sponge and there's no air drying the paper out, then your wet palette isn't wet enough. Okay. Surface Tension says, I saw some Winsor & Newton metallic oil paints in a shop today. Have you ever tried these? No, I have not. I mean, I have a bunch of Winsor & Newton oil paints. I don't have any metallics. I will have to take a look at those. I am highly interested. You have piqued my interest, Surface Tension. As somebody who, as we all, I think anybody who follows me regularly knows, I am always on the hunt for, you know, metallic paints. Vallejo metal color is the best metal paint in the acrylic world. And there are lots of, like, the only thing I think that is a better metal paint outright is Alcade, the Alcad 2 or whatever, because you can polish it as well. It's an enamel. It's very strong, but it's also like really stinky and really hard to work with. I don't find oil paints too annoying to work with. I'll have to give that a look-see. Huh. I don't know what that would be, but that's kind of a cool idea. I need to actually make a note for myself because I don't want to forget that. That sounds really cool, Surface Tension. Winsor & Newton oil metallics. Cool. Sorry, I needed to make a note for myself. That's super cool. All right. Well, Lloyd might have left, but Lloyd, thank you very much, sir. All right, Steve Keene, do you have any advice on using Vallejo plastic putty? Want to use it for gaps that are a bit too big for varnish to fill, but too small for green stuff? Yeah, sure. I use it all the time. So what he means is this, by the way. This is Vallejo plastic putty. By the way, if you're having trouble with this, you could also try Perfect Putty. It's a similar product. You get a big tube of it for maybe $10. A lot of people swear by it. It's pretty good. It's a very similar product. Now, as to how to use it, sure. Here's what you do. The key is you think of it like paint. Okay. So you squeeze a little out onto a dry palette. You get your brush wet and you smooth it out. So, like, by the way, do not use a nice brush for this. Use some crappy synthetic brush. No. Sorry, my dog is chewing on the masking tape I keep on the side of my desk. So you get your brush wet and, like, you take your putty and you actually smooth it out, just like you would thin out paint. And then you actually paint with it. And then you wipe off your brush and then you, with just the water, you smooth the edges of it around. And you can put on a lot or a little, but when you're done, you wait, you let it really dry, and then you take a very fine sanding stick and you sand it down. Okay. And that's it. That's all. The key is the water. It's an acrylic putty. So it's meant to work with water and be water soluble. Okay. Hopefully that helps. Okay. I can get FW locally. So Josh Saunders says, I can get FW locally, and this is a selfish request, but is it possible to do a video on using them? Yeah, I have a review of them, but I assume you mean like a full-scale tutorial. Sure. Why don't we do this? Put into the comments what you would like me to see, like what you would like to see, sorry, how you see that going. And I'm happy to do it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to use them is the short answer. But sure, I can, if you have some thoughts. I tend to just integrate them into my other tutorials, but I'm happy to do something specific. Okay. Let's see. Zab Asylum says, I'm going to paint yellow clothes next week. I was thinking of using some fiery orange for the shadow. Does that sound right? No. You want to stay away. I assume what you mean. I don't know fiery orange off the top of my head, but I assume it's something like this color or this color. Something like those, right? I mean, yellow doesn't turn orange in the shadows. That's a different wavelength, right, of color. What you want to use for your shadow on yellow is something like this. Or something like, sorry, this. Ochre, rust. Put the two together, you will get orange shadows. So assuming your basic yellow that you're doing, if you're talking like yellow clothes, you find a really bright yellow. Kind of ochre too. There we go. Boom. Okay, so let's say this would be, if we were trying to construct a sort of triad in theory, right? If this is your yellow, this is your shadow, and this is your deepest shadows. And this should be, I don't, like, very rarely do you go full in on this. Like, this is generally mixed up with this in some way. But, like, you know, this can be mostly it. Maybe at the end, you're like 80-20 or something. The more you dip into, like, ochre colors, rust colors, etc., that's where you'll see the shadow of the yellow feel real. And you want to be pretty controlled and light with it. Like, yellow itself doesn't have these huge shadow effects. So, but that's a good way to start. Okay. All right. Okay, let's see. All right, so Will wants to know, he says he's having trouble painting oxidized aged brass. All right, Will, what do you mean? Do you mean like you're having trouble with the oxidation? Are you trying to do it in a non-metallic style, or do you just mean like you're painting brass and then you want to oxidize it and you're not sure how to oxidize it? Clarify exactly what you mean, and I'll answer your question, because I can answer all of that, but I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. Oh yeah, John Jay pointed out to Matt Campbell, check out Game4. It has a database of over 6,000 sources. That is, I don't know why I didn't shout that out. Yes, that's a great idea. I have it on my phone and I do use it when I travel. So Game4 is an app by Adam from Tabletop Minions. He and his company, they put it together. It really is a great app. It's how I discovered that random game store in Philadelphia that I mentioned, actually, that's off 3rd Street. So there you go. How about that? And so the app's really good if you want to find a store. I would say wherever you are in Philadelphia, give that a look up and you'll see the stores around you. You can just give them a shout and see if they have Vallejo. Okay. I have somebody trying to help me out here. Hi, baby. I don't think you're going to help this much. Okay. All right, so Racknock says white ? I don't know what you mean. We'll have to see. Legionnaire says, is there a topic yet? Yeah, whatever questions you want. That's the topic. Joe says, I know Sam taught me the zenithal as a guide to know what to paint, and it's really helped. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Even if you tend to use thicker paints, it will still help those paints be a truer color faster without putting on tons of layers, and will help you understand, if you look at it beforehand, where your highlights go. It's just a great sort of sketch of what to do. All right. Moronics Product 3. What are the exceptions? The exceptions are true metallic steel if the whole thing is going to be steel. You don't need to zenithal it generally. You zenithal with the metals. I actually like painting. I just recently started doing this, but I actually like painting my true. So think of like the frame on a Knight Titan, right? Like not the armor plates, but the actual inner frame is a good example. I actually paint it in Stynylrez Black Primer because Stynylrez Black Primer is one of the worst black primers I've ever seen, but it is an amazingly good blue-black gloss primer. I just mean it's failing at being black primer, but it's still a great primer. Like Stynylrez is a wonderful product. It just isn't black. I don't know what color they were going for there, but they didn't achieve black. What they achieved is glossy blue-black. It basically has the same tone as Payne's Gray, but in a polyurethane primer of sorts. So it's and gloss black looks great under steel. Metal paints are fairly opaque, but fairly is not completely. And glossy black underneath your steel will help it reflect and look like brighter steel. So that's an exception. If I'm going to do the other exception is if I'm priming something that is flame, pure flame. I don't zenithal it because that's incorrect. Anything where the heat is on the inside, so that reverses your expectations, where the lowest parts are the brightest and the outermost parts are the darkest. You don't zenithal if you assuming you can get at them that closely. I will tend to just do those in like a bone color. Like there's a Sinal Res bone color I really like. So there you go. Those are the exceptions in general. Now, the zenithal can be in different colors. Like when I'm painting warm, I don't use black, gray, white. I use dark brown, rust, ivory. But it's the same principle, right? Okay. John J. Question. What 3 techniques should a newbie try to master first? Oh boy, that's a tough one. Let me think about that. You think that through. Okay. 3 techniques you should master first. I'm not going to say zenithal priming is a technique because it's not. That's just the application of paint. Anybody can do that. There's nothing to master there. Just, do it. So I'll say that's a freebie. So actual techniques. Wet blending, because it's the easiest way to achieve blends quickly and it's dead drop simple. With either the right paints or the right additives, namely a retardant, anybody can do it. It takes seconds. It's so simple and stupid and easy. And people are afraid of it because it sounds like some big deal. It's not. It's so easy. Glazing, because it's a pretty useful thing to do. And what glazing will teach you is how to properly thin and control your paint, like to understand its thinness. Glazing is harder, but there's a very direct thing about it. And again, you can use additives and stuff to help you. It's a pretty essential technique for doing a lot of different things. And I would say like a third technique, I don't know. Probably, honestly, I would just say like brush control. Just practicing try to work on your brush control. Always be thinking about it. When you're like the way you're holding your brush, you're wicking your paint off, you're touching the brush to the miniature. Keep the brush sideways for the most part. By the way, I don't necessarily mean painting cleanly. You can refine later. I mean, literally just getting the brush to do what you want is something you need to think about and understand. You can paint messy, but with a high amount of brush control. So a good example of that, by the way, is like James Wapple. If you watch James Wapple, he paints messy as all get out because he paints in a style that I particularly favor and love, which is you start broad. We're just getting colors in places. We're setting general tones. Who cares if paint gets in other places? Who cares? It's irrelevant. People waste time on base coats. It drives me crazy. Your base coat always looks bad. There is no miniature ever that has just been base coated and looks good. Take all the time you want. It's still going to look bad when you're done. Base coats don't look good. They always look bad because they are a single color. So you can either spend a lot of time doing something that is going to look bad, or you can get paint around there quick and then refine later in the stage where you're making the mini look good. Like that's how James paints. He gets this shaded base coat down and then he refines. So he starts broad and then works to the detail. And I mean, if you've ever seen James paint, he's obviously an incredible artist. And, he has an incredible amount of brush control. He uses like size 8 brushes for a lot of his work, which is, I can't even picture. So he knows what he's doing, but he paints messy as all get out. So that's my answer. Cubstar says, I want to paint the town red. What red would you recommend? Oh boy. That's a very funly phrased question. I like a lot of different reds. I mean, it depends on what kind of red you want. There's so many different interesting reds. Red's a fascinating tone, right? Because it's mostly transparent. It can dip into orange. It can dip into purple. It can dip into brown. You can mix in blacks for interesting effects. It can go into pink. Like red is some element of magenta. It's just such a versatile color that can do so many things. Now, If you're asking me, Vince, what are some of your favorite reds? Okay, sure. I can answer that question. We'll start with like the ink I mentioned earlier. So Vallejo Game Ink Red. It's a wonderful bright red. I like it. Vallejo Model Air Ferrari Red. It's nice. It is Ferrari colored. They mix it to match basically the same red as the car, which is a unique red color. Here we go. Sorry, getting real close to the camera there. Ball Crimson from Fantasy and Games Scale 75 has a bit more of like a crimson-y tone, but it's a wonderful, like bright. It has a hint of sort of pink into it, but I really like it. It's super intense. Red 2 from War Colors is really nice. Again, like very vibrant. If you're looking for darker reds, like in the darker red category, Hull Red, again, from like Vallejo Model Color is one of my favorite, like model or air, doesn't really matter. Hull Red is one of my favorite dark reds. Bloodfest Crimson from Scale 75 is maybe my favorite crimson color of all time. I use that a lot, probably too much. And then like War Colors also makes a red glaze, which is I love their glaze line. This is a great red glaze. So there you go. These are the reds of our lives. But any of those are fine. I hope you like all. I like all of them. I use all of them. All right. Aviad, speaking of oils, any idea what might be the cause of washes going grainy and separate? Using Winsor Newton thinner and oils. Going grainy and separating. So you're saying you're doing an oil wash and you're using Winsor Newton thinner and oils and it's going grainy and separating. Huh. No, I haven't seen that. I mean, I do a lot of oil washes. I've never had them go grainy on me or separate. Maybe too much thinner. Like you might want to try a bit of a different oil in there rather than just like the white spirits. I don't know. That's interesting. I can try to look into it, but I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head. I'm sorry. Legionnaires, any tips on two-brush blending? I feel like I'm drowning the paint with spit and I'm not seeing much of a transitional blend. Sure. I mean, I don't two-brush blend very much because I don't really see much of a need to it. You can just use one brush and achieve what you want. And what I mean by that is like, you know, like I'm blending these cloaks out using this and like, I'm not doing anything big with it. Like, okay, so all of this was done through like wet blends and then glazing, but I only used one brush. I mean, the real key is you don't want a super wet brush. You don't want it to be that wet because then it'll instantly destroy the color. Oh my God. This one, sorry, this is the new dog and she's very attention hungry. Anyways, so when you're two brush blending, you want your second brush to be moist. The short answer is like, I honestly find single brush void blending easier. But if we're going to talk about your ways to two brush blend, my answer would be keep your second brush fairly moist. Keep it in your like mouth, like hold your second brush, up like this while you're working, and then just switch. And take the wet part of the brush and go below where you're wanting to pull the paint to. So if this is the darker color of paint, okay. If this is the here, let's do it. Let's just do it right now. 1, 2, 3, do it. Okay. Here we go. I'll use my finger. So here I've got the brown, right? Now, my honest, easy answer is just I wet wipe, spit the brush. Now we'll take some white, right? And then I take the white and you go up and into it. And then down. And then I void out the brush. Right? Now, I did that backwards. Like, I can't actually see what the heck I'm doing there, but that's the basic premise. Just do the same thing, but with two brushes. The key is don't have your brush be too wet. And don't start in the paint. Start below it, spread the moisture, and then pull it down in. pull the two together, go up, and then back down. Then void it out and kind of smooth. Hopefully that helps. HL17, I want to ask a bit about wet palette. Is there any way to avoid getting the horrible smell the next day if I close the lid? Yeah, that means you're getting like mold or things that are bad in there. So, you know, that's one of the like that is one of the great advantages of this new Redgrass wet palette. The sponge is like, I don't know what they're using, but they're not kidding when they say antimicrobial. I haven't seen any problems out of this. Now, here's my answers. Sure. If you're using like a normal sponge, here's a couple different things you can do. One, take some copper wire. Go get like a string of copper wire from the hardware store. Cut it up into pieces and put the copper wire into your wet palette. Copper is naturally antimicrobial and will stop that. 2, take some surfactant, which is like this stuff from Watercolors. You can buy it in big amounts from the art store and put some drops of it in there. It is also naturally antimicrobial and will stop that happening. Assuming your sponge is not going to die from alcohol, which, by the way, the Redgrass sponge will die from alcohol. So don't do this for that, or at least dilute it way the hell down, like 1 to 500. Put a single drop of like 90% isopropyl alcohol into your mix and let that soak in. That'll generally, I mean, isopropyl alcohol is obviously highly antimicrobial. That's why it's used to like clean wounds and stuff. So all of those things. Use distilled water. Don't use normal water. Normal water has a lot of added things in it that are going to naturally turn into microbes pretty fast and get stinky and die. Because that's what you're smelling is dead microbes. Dead bacterial microbes floating in your water are evaporating and coming up into your nose. You're breathing dead bacteria. Gross. No, anyway, just like stuff like that'll help. It's a problem I always did too. Like my Masterson palette, I had to really fight it to keep it smelling fresh, and all that stuff is stuff I did. Okay. Let's see. Artie Freeman. With Speed Freaks on the way, any tips on painting rubber tires? Yes, I have a hobby cheating lined up for rubber tires. It's not the one coming today, but you may see it quite soon. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how to paint rubber. I'll just say that. The short answer is there's this very nice set of paint specifically for this. You want to use, like, you have to play in gray blue tones, and and weathering is essential. That's the short answer. Tires are clean for 3 seconds. Like if you get new tires on your car, they are clean for the 3 seconds you back up out of the bay, and then pretty much they're dirty by the time you get home. But road dust has a very particular character to it. Okay. Dave says, for large models, are you the sort of person that gets the main paint job right, base, highlights, detail, then sets it with gloss varnish, then after that, a pin wash, and finally a matte varnish? No. No, not at all. None of that is my style. So, like, for a large model, I don't know what you mean. When you said pin wash, I mean, pin wash is traditionally associated with vehicles where they have panel lines you can pin wash. So, like, if you want to talk about, and there's a difference between organic and inorganic large figures. So, very quickly, I'll run you through the paint job, on like something like that, which is my robot, right? Hey, can we not squeak the ball? Probably not. Anyways, so I'll run you very quickly through my strategy on this. So we start, here it is. Here's the rundown on a Night Titan. I'll talk about the actual body of the thing where I'm painting I'll leave the skeletal frame out. So here we're talking about the armor carapace. Zenithal Prime with an eye toward panel modulation. Modulate the panels. Line all of the panels. Edge highlight all of the panels. Then apply a light varnish to lock everything in. Then do all the freehand and decals. Okay. Then varnish again. Oh, sorry. All the freehand decals and weathering. This is also the stage where I do So no, by the way, no metallics, 0 metallics. This is all matte paint first. Sorry. Then a varnish. Then the oil weathering. Let that completely dry. Then a light varnish. Then the metallics. Then weather the metallics. Then done. And you do the rivets in the last step too. Now, if it's a big organic model, it's a lot more slapdash because you don't have this need to like very carefully stack all these things. If it's a very organic model, paint around, paint a lot of different things, put color places. I mean, I often don't varnish models at all. Like with those, I have to because I'm using a lot of oils and decals and stuff like that, which require varnish to make everything come together. But for a particularly large organic model, like say the Keeper of Secrets that I did, she's right there, like the one from Raging Heroes. You know, I don't think I varnished her. If I did, it was maybe a light matte varnish to add some oil for shading and stuff like that and skin tones. But on the whole, you know, I paint it like I would any other figure. It's like if it's a large organic model, there's absolutely no difference in how I approach it between that and a normal 28 mil figure. You get to be more fun because you have to be like, you can just slap a lot of paint around and go nuts and have a party, which is fun. But other than that, same thing. All right. Joe says, a quick answer would be all I need for this question. I picked up some FW white ink. Other than making smooth whites, what are the uses do you generally use it for? I got it for experimentation. Things I use FW white ink for. Sure. So, smooth whites is a great one. Very thin lines, like freehand thin lines, essential. I use it when I want to mix white in my airbrush and do white areas on a miniature, like with a mix. Like I want to add tint to the tone. White ink off of FW is one of your best bets. A drop or two and you're good to go, and it's smooth as butter coming out of the airbrush. Trying to think of other things I use it on. Just as a general mix with white in brush painting as well. Oftentimes it's a thing I'll use. Yeah, that's probably all. Okay. Joel says, for doing primer and base paint through airbrush, what is the normal range for air pressure? On Iwata, he's using an Iwata brush as well. You use 20 psi. Yeah, 18 to 20 psi. There are a couple weird tricks you need to go way down on the psi on, but 18 to 20 is right. Okay, Will Myers clarified his brass question like a statue. Sure. I mean, the key is if you want to do brass weathering, brass can weather with the normal oxide, and that's fine. You can also use blacks and stipple. The key is you like look at real life examples, Google brass statues, and look at how they've weathered. Anytime I'm weathering, the first question I ask is, what does it look like in reality? The best advice I can ever give you is, more than anything else, there are millions of pictures of good weathering on the internet. Like, just that people like taking pictures of it because it has this natural, organic sort of randomness to it that's quite beautiful. So people take pictures of it. Photographers love to take pictures of weathered stuff. So you can find all sorts of interesting examples of anything. That's usually where I start when I want to weather anything. I find a real life version of that thing and look at how it weathered. What happened? Where did the streaks run? What does it look like? Brass can go black when it oxidizes. It can go somewhat green tone, somewhat blue tone. The answer is you can kind of stipple and mix all that in. I use a little verdigris from Vallejo. I use maybe a little nilic oxide. I use a little scale 75 ink tense green, and then I just kind of, and then maybe a little like black paint, or mix with maybe even a tiny amount of black pigment. And I just kind of go crazy with that depending on how weathered I want it. You can have a lot of fun just stippling stuff around. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Okay, Clark Spear says, I tried your non-metallic metal style true metallic technique, and when I stipple the black in on and attempt to smooth it out, I end up with tide marks where I stippled. Can I prevent this? Yes, you have too much paint or wash or whatever you're doing. If you're using like a Nuln oil or something on your, it can tide mark quite easily. A good black ink is really what you want to do that particular stippling style you're talking about. Of like, I assume you're referencing like the weathered iron out of like video 103 or whatever. Black ink is going to serve you better, and you want less of it. The other trick is mix a tiny bit of your metallic paint into your black when you do that stippling. The acrylic paint will even out the wash or the ink or whatever. You still want it, like, I'm talking like 90-10 here on the ratio, okay? But it will even that out and prevent you from getting those tide marks. Those tide marks are happening because the pigment is settling unevenly. Washes don't self-level. They're not meant to. They're meant to flow to recesses. They're meant to not settle evenly. And so when you put a wash on a flat surface, it's going to settle unevenly. Namely, it's just going to pool in certain places and puddle. So like inks don't have that same problem because they're not so filled with like this flow stuff that's going to make them really sink. So a black ink can be better, but a little bit of that metallic paint mixed in should be the answer for what you're looking for. That should help. Hopefully that helps. If not, just, try that. Drop me a comment. We can try to work it through. Okay, let's see. And all right. Michael Anderson, I'm finding that some of my minis have hard to reach areas due to the sculpt, and I don't have an airbrush. What are some ways I can get into these areas without an airbrush? Well, I wouldn't try an airbrush in a hard to reach area. That's always a nightmare. Like airbrushes suck at reaching hard to reach areas because air is blowing out like this out of your airbrush. If you're trying to get into a hard to reach area that's like this, and you put something that's like this against it, what happens? It doesn't go in there. You're not like airbrush doesn't paint like a line, it paints like this. So the short answer is subassemblies. Like I showed this Zinchi sorcerer guy earlier. Like down here that's his cloaky thing, right? Like I didn't put these together because if I put it together, right, what happens is I cover up the entire back of him and then make it almost impossible to get to that cloak. Whereas if I leave it separate, I can easily get at those things. So sub-assemblies is really your key. I don't think an airbrush is going to help you at all for that, to be completely honest. I have just as much trouble with my airbrush getting into those areas. Just leaving them separate is probably your best answer. Okay. Yeah, the Statue of Liberty is to continue, Will. Yeah, a lot of stippling of that green. Like, go look at the Statue of Liberty, but look at it close up. Don't just passively look at it. Actively look at it. What I mean by that is this is one of the best tricks I can tell you in miniature painting. Maybe that's one of the first things you should master. I don't know. Think forth. Actively looking at things. Okay? For example, let's all play a game here together real quick. What color is this wall? Your initial answer is probably white, right? And that's fair. It is. That's what your brain tells you. That's the heuristic. But it's not. It's not white. First of all, it's some kind of cream off color. But in addition to that, look at the difference in tone here in between the two black frames, how much brighter this looks. One, because of the contrast, and two, because of where the light is hitting it versus here, right? And look at the tones that are being captured in this area of the wall. It's not just gray, right? There's other things going on here. Look at the yellow that's around here, right? And then you can see where it's picking up these different colors from around it, right? Actively look at the thing, really, especially with weathering. Look at the detail, hone in. If you look at the Statue of Liberty, it's a lot of like streaking down and sort of stippling effects. It's, just a century plus of oxidation where it's run down and it's stippled into the imperfections in the metal. So you can achieve that through both in stippling and streaking. Okay. Alexander, what do you think is the magic behind the Blanche OS28 style of painting? No, I'm not the guy for that, man. John Blanche is one of my favorite artists, but I don't like that style of miniature painting. I think his 2D art he's truly made pieces of art that sold me on this world, on miniature wargaming. Things that I feel are incredible, that I think are some of literally my favorite pieces of art ever in history, like held up to any artist ever. But I don't like that style of miniature painting. I find it to be dirty and cluttered and noisy. I mean, again, this is all my personal taste, man. And you shouldn't teach what you don't like. right? Like that's not a good recipe. I teach what I'm passionate about, and I can only teach you my style and how I enjoy it. And the reality is, I don't like that style. That's nothing against it. That is not a value judgment of it being bad. If you like it, that's totally awesome. I completely support that. I am saying to my eye, it is not a thing I enjoy. There are lots of paint styles I don't like. And that just happens to be one of them. So I can't help you on that one. I suspect if I had to take a guess at why people like it, is because it is a quick, messy style that says there's no you're not going to be wrong when you try crazy things. Be messy, be dirty, have fun, experiment. That attitude I completely support. Right? Like that is one of the most critical keys of all of miniature painting. You need to lose the fear, paint bravely. There is no wrong here. There can be things you don't like. There's no wrong here. And so although I completely agree with the sentiment that it promotes, I don't like the outcome. That's all. So there you go. I hope that helps. I know that's not very satisfying. I'm sorry, but I know but that's the best I can do. Rebecca Ireland, how would you go about painting a rogue idol in a scheme that is similar to the Balrog in the Lord of the Rings? You mean hot on the inside, I assume? Like the center parts are the heat. He's all... Now I don't remember the name of it. Smoke and flame, ash and flame, something. Fire and shadow. Nope, I don't know. It's gone. I think it's fire and shadow. Anyway, boy, I really need to watch those movies again. It's probably been like 5 years. That's too long. Anyways, yeah, I would prime it all in white. I would do it just like, so I have a video on painting fire. I would do that exact thing, except I would take the outer layers to very dark, crusty red, black, brown, right? So like keep it hot inside, and then I would just like, you could probably do most of it through dry brushing, to be completely honest, especially since he's highly textured. You just lighter and lighter, softer and softer dry brushes. But I'd start with like a good, not white, I'd start with a good ivory. White is going to be too bright. You're really going to like throw yourself off there. I would prime the whole model. This is, like I said, when I'm doing models that are flame, where the heat is the inside, that's when I don't zenithal, if that's what you're talking about. I would go for like again, that Steino Res bone. Then I would take some white paint and I would paint deepest parts, purposely white, but carefully. Then I would do the whole thing in yellow. And then probably from there, just a lot of dry brushing of like, because he's a real rough model if you're using the actual rogue idol. So probably a lot of rough dry brushing, like to progressively darker colors, orange, and then, somewhat of an orange red, and then a red black, and then black. Because the Balrog is also like really dark. He's not like, he has his heat inside is very like subdued. He's high contrast. Okay. HL17, talking about glazing and shading, should we bother to do shadow on the surface of the part if we're going to glaze the whole surface later, since we can pool the glaze paint into the crest and part? I'm not sure what you mean, HL17. I need you to re-explain that one. I'm not sure what you're asking me. Okay. Let's see. Zab says, are you still working on the Mordheim Age of Sigmar project? Not really this related to this, but the answer is no. We had to put it to the side. Basically, Tom is in the middle of his dissertation and has 4 kids right now. So we don't exactly have time to work on it. And so we had to put that to the side. It's something I'd love to return to someday if we ever get the chance, but it'll probably be hopefully after Tom gets his doctorate. If they haven't just went ahead and made it. Okay. Jamie says how to use Army Painter paints. I don't like any other paint. Army Painter's fine. It's effectively the equivalent of like Vallejo or anything else. It doesn't have anything special about it. It uses a liquid medium. So it should paint in your traditional layer style pretty well. No, there's no pitfalls to Army Painter that I can think of. If you mean like their strong tones or inks or stuff like that, that might have some interesting different answers. But for the regular paint, yeah, just however you want, like normal way. It's a fairly low pigment density, but for paint, like it's not a craft store paint or something awful like that. but it is one of the lower pigment densities of the paints out there. So you have to be careful how much you thin it. If you're going to thin it way down, you want to make sure you focus on something like having a medium. Get yourself some like glaze medium or Lamia medium or thinner medium, or I don't care if it says medium in the title, it's the right thing. Don't get hung up on the name. If it's, as long as it says medium in the title, you purchase the right product. Okay. Let's see. John J says you should draft up a list of the colors of which brands you recommend as a kit: woods, bloods, armors, weapon, etc. Yeah, it's a funny thing to say that. I'm sure there's some I could do. Because like my base default de facto go-to wood is almost always starting with Inktense wood, right? The trick is that it would be very hard to do because I don't stop there. So like, let's take, I'll give you a good example of why that would be difficult for me to do. And this is a thing that drives my co-host on Warhammer Weekly, Tom, insane because of how I paint. So one of my fun challenges I often do with myself is see what you could do with just what's on the palette. What have you already gotten off the wall? Use that to get what you need to. Like challenging yourself like with artist palettes. So if I've got some basic colors down, I'll just mix. Like take wood. So yeah, I'll zenithal it and I'll put that Inktense wood over it. And it looks like wood, but it just looks like normal wood. But I don't necessarily want to stop there. Let's say I want some dark wood. Okay, cool. Then I'm going to wash the whole thing in Agrax, maybe do a little targeted ivory at the tips to increase contrast, then wash the whole thing over with sepia, then do a little Nuln down in the darkest recesses to really create like this dark contrast wood. Let's say I want dead wood. Okay, well then I'll dry brush the whole Inktense wood thing with gray. Then I'll run just an Agrax over it. Then I'll dry brush it with gray again. And then in some of the parts, I'll run a Nuln over it. Right? And that's just one, like, that's just 3 different types of woods. I mean, I've used a lot of other things. I'll grab some ashen brown from like Reaper and work some of that in there, or some rust color from Secret Weapon and use some of that if I want a rich brown tone. The problem is that like, I can tell you maybe step 1 and 2, but like, I don't have really common recipes. I tend to use different stuff every time. I have some paints I love, but how I use them often varies greatly. That's not meant to be like an evasive answer or something. I just mean that like, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, look at me, I do all this different stuff. That's not what I mean at all. I like challenging myself with using different weird paints because it's a fun thing to do to me. But that makes it very difficult for me to then communicate to you what I'm using. Probably the one exception would be my teal armor. I guess I do have a very set recipe for that. So there you go, which is Despair Green, Emerald 2, Payne's Gray, and White. That's it. It's like my favorite armor recipe, and it's just those 4 colors. You play around with them. Okay. Ralph Hummel, Vince, do you use your slow DR neat out of the bottle, or do you thin it down as recommended when you're using it? I think you mean like the retardant medium or the matte or like any of that stuff or flow aid or any of those things out of the bottle. Yes, I do thin all those down, like as per the a little less than the recommended, but not super less. So like take flow aid, for example. If you buy Liquitex flow aid, it says 20-1 is the ratio. I probably go like 10 or 15-1, but still. Let's see. Grimlock Steve, any tips for using blue stuff to cast heads for models for 2-part molds? I always fail. I don't. I haven't really played with blue stuff enough. I would look up Maroc Wolf on YouTube. Maroc has a small channel, but he does a lot of casting. Reach out to him. Like literally, he has cast armies using blue stuff. He converts every model he does for his armies, and most of them are recast with blue stuff to remake heads and weapons and stuff like that. So I'm sure if you reach out to him, he can give you a cornucopia of tips. And he has sent me a couple of the things he's cast, and they look great. So that's the best I can tell you. Okay. Rebecca says, what is panel modulation? I have a video on it. Look up my panel modulation video and that'll explain it. But the simple answer is vehicles have panels, metal panels, And panel modulation is a way to create visual interest across those panels by having them get slightly darker near the panel lines and slightly brighter in the center of the panel. Shortest, simplest answer. You'll see it in practice if you look at the video. Okay. We are about an hour 5. So I'm going to start wrapping up, take some final questions, and then we'll call it a day. Jarrett, would you consider doing a video about painting bronze or brass true metallic metal? I know you don't like any bronze paint, so I'd be interested in seeing how you do it. Sure. I probably should do. I didn't do a lot of gold and steel and haven't really done much in bronze and brass. Bronze is a perfectly fine color. It's there is zero. You're absolutely right. There are 0 bronze paints I like on the market right now. It's a real challenge. But yes, I do have a way I still accomplish it, and I can show you what that is. Because like I do use bronze on these big boys, for a lot of like the inner parts on the skeleton. And so I do have a recipe I like. I should do that. That's a really good one. Let me write that down too. Bronze tutorial. Bronze TMM tutorial. Okay. Yes, I have 3 dogs actually now. One is in this chair behind me. Somebody mentioned my dogs. I don't think you can see her, but she's laying down in this chair right here. That's where she sits. That's her chair. Okay. Let's see. Vince, have you ever done any historical like Team Yankee or Flames of War? I would love to see your attention to detail applied to vehicles. No, I have never done. That's not true. I guess I've done like 1 or 2 historical figures. I don't like historical figures. If you may have noticed in a lot of my painting, I like bright, ridiculous colors, blues, purples, pinks, greens, and teals. I love explosions of color. I like to be bright. I like high contrast. I like magic and dragons and stuff like that. Most of those things don't really show up in historicals. Historicals is as an art. I also, by the way, hate being constrained by like, I very rarely use any paint scheme that's on the box. Like I hate box paint schemes. I don't care to follow them. I do my own thing. When I was very young, one of the first songs I ever heard that I liked was "You Can Go Your Own Way" by Fleetwood Mac. And I was like, well, there we go. That's my life set then. But whereas historicals generally demand a certain amount of accuracy or at least heeding of historical norms. Now, there are some exceptions to these bright colors. They're the bright color exception. A lot of like 20th century sort of historicals tend to be more dour because they often are focused around like World War II or Vietnam or World War I, which often had a lot more like green tones and very muted and somber things. But I mean, there's also, you can go back and look at like Napoleonics where you have like incredible bright Prussian blues and reds and stuff like that. So it's not that I am not trying to make a blanket statement that like historicals are boring or flat by nature. That's not true. It's really the accuracy thing that kills it for me. But like things like World War II stuff, that is straight out. And again, like with tanks, yeah, I mean, I've painted a few tanks. They're okay. I don't hate it. I like vehicles in general, so that's probably my favorite thing to paint historically. But in the end, if it was like paint a World War II tank or paint a Warhammer 40K tank where I can like do crazy, ridiculous freehand of grails and wings and fire and you know, go over the top with battle damage and have it be in ridiculous chapter colors. I've painted a lot of like 40K tanks because I find those to be super fun. So that's the answer. Let's see. Mickey R for the Balrog. He says he can recommend watching videos on forging under a power hammer. The scale looks black when it flakes off and cools rapidly. That's your skin. Oh, neat. Okay. Joseph Unger says, so I painted the War of the Ring board game, and the plastic, I assume, made the paint all sticky, ruined a few of my brushes. Was it just cheap plastic or what? So some plastics, depending on what they are, resins, plastics, react poorly with certain primers and activate a stickiness. There's a chemical reaction that happens because of the accelerant in the primer, usually, but not always. So my particular guess is that's what happened, and then that bled through up into your paint. Just a guess, but that's where I would lay it. Asteroid TV. I'm a beginner painter and I have trouble doing metal weapons on my minis. Any rough tips? Sure, tons. My advice would be think about the lessons of how painters paint non-metallic metal in your true metallic metal. Buy good metal paints. Buy Vallejo metal color. And I don't mean like you need to learn non-metallic metal. I mean, just go look at how people have painted it and think about where they place the light and shadow, and then go watch the videos I have on painting true metallic weapons. I have several of them, and I would really recommend you watch those. Those go into very, very deep detail. True metallic weapons are a huge focus for me and can probably help you out a great deal. So I would very much recommend you go back in this series. Like this video, this hobby cheating is in a playlist. I see a lot of people ask me this. This is in a playlist. Every hobby cheating is in a playlist. You just scan back to the playlist. You'll see lots of things on doing true metallic weapons. Okay. Okay. John Gallant. I have a large batch of miniatures that I zenithal highlighted a while back. Some of the black on them has gone very shiny when originally it was matte. What is the likely cause? Like the black part of what you primed went shiny? Post? I have no idea, man. I have never seen that. That's interesting. I don't know. I don't imagine it would impact your paint much. Like if you use very matte paints, it'll probably kill it out. But oh, sorry, Maroc Wolf. MARROKWOLF. Maroc. MARROK. Sorry about that. Sleeb says, hi, Vince. I'm in the planning phase of painting a large amount of night goblins. Any tips on the black cowls? Did various tests yesterday. I am currently layering 4 layers of Nuln oil or dark tone wash over zenithal, but wanted to hear your thoughts on the other possible methods. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to go about it. I generally hate black. Black is a real pain in the tuchus to paint. So the answer is it's not going to be the most fun time. It depends on what you want to achieve is the short answer. Like, how nice do you want these to look? If it's a ton of goblins, that can be real tough. With the zenithal, the easiest way, here's your super, super duper shortcut way. Zenithal them like normal. Take a strong black ink. Like, don't try to use Nuln. Nuln has brown in it and it's too weak. Go get yourself a black ink. Like, just order some Vallejo game ink, black ink. It'll cost you like $4 off Amazon or something at most. With the shipping, if you have to pay shipping, if it's Prime, it's probably less. You know, it's a couple bucks. Or go to your store and get it. And sort of thin that into a glaze and then pull that down. Like I think of their little pointy hats. Think of starting with the glaze here and pulling it down. And like do that. And then when it's still wet, keep a second brush, get a little gray, and kind of push that into the ridges and the edges, and then just smooth it out into the ink. Call it a day. Right? You'll have to practice with that a little bit to get the mix exactly right and the speed. You may need to use a little bit of retardant medium, but that should help. Okay. Let's see. All right, I'm going to take like 2 more questions, and then we're going to call it. This one won't count. How do you paint a wet-looking effect? That is an extremely complicated question. The short answer is don't. I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't slather it in gloss medium or satin medium. That is not going to achieve what you want to achieve. Painting something to look wet is one of the hardest things you can do. That's the short answer. That would require, if you want an example of something that looks wet, correct, go look up Banshee's art he did for the Kabuki, like octopus girl. He makes her look glossy and wet, and that's all paint. And the answer is you need to fake the short answer is you need to fake the illusion of water reflections without actually doing it, with just paint. So it looks glossy without being glossy. That takes very careful placement of very careful white reflections, and it's a super pain. Okay. Okay, so last question. Out of all the competition pieces you've seen, what is the absolute best piece you've ever seen? Oh my God, that is one hell of a question. I don't know that I could answer that. I can't pick a best. Things like this, it's just too hard to compare. Because, like, what's the best diorama compared to the best single figure? I don't know, man. Here's some answers. Jessica Rich did a wonderful piece for ReaperCon in 2016 that is one of the most beautiful, gorgeous examples of freehand I've ever seen brought across the brocade pattern of an entire dress. It was an inspiration to me and something I love so much that when she put it up for sale, I bought it. I own it now. It's in that cabinet over there, and it's one of my favorite pieces ever. I took Best in Show for non-Reaper that year. Sam Lenz's work from around of his diorama that he did for Adepticon and took Best in Show with at Nova was one of my favorite pieces ever. The texture, the narrative, the story, the background art. There are the ground is being warped into chaos, and he used teeth in there. Like, there are teeth in there. They're not real teeth, but they are real teeth. They're casts of his teeth he took and then used them as groundwork. It's detailed. It's incredible. It's a stunning masterpiece. Damon Drescher did a Salamander Terminator 2 years ago at Nova that I'm guessing if you looked at and just kind of gave a passing glance to, you'd be like, yeah, it's cool looking Terminator. It requires you to understand. I think that once you paint miniatures and you compete for a long time, you look at miniatures differently. Like, that is to say, people who, and I'm not trying to count myself among this or anything, but like artists who are very talented will look at pieces differently and notice things differently. But and honestly, I had to have somebody point this out originally to me because I missed it. So that's why I'm not counting myself in this bunch. But then once I looked, I saw it and it was incredible. It's the asymptote of a Space Marine. The other one that's like this is Land's Ultramarine he did like 2-3 years ago at Adepticon. Both of which are they're just perfect asymptotes of what it is to be a Space Marine. They are so perfectly executed. The color, the tone, the textures, every piece, every placement, every pigment looks perfect. Darren Latham's Lord Celestant that he did with its all non-metallic metal is a paragon of NMM work that blows my mind to this day. That looks just beyond incredible. Richard Gray's Corrupted Chaos Knight of Tzeentch that he took Salute with last year is the most beautiful freehand I've ever seen on a miniature, and one of my out and out favorite pieces of all time as a fan of Knights and doing freehand on Knights and a fan of Tzeentch. It's, again, just staggering how good he is at it. Aaron Lovejoy has a piece he did of a diorama 3 years ago at Adepticon that was a fight of infinity figures outside of a movie theater. I love it because of his attention to detail. He built like the box office and everything was built from scratch, and he has wires hanging out where things are broken. Like, there's 1,000 things to discover on that diorama of little bits of interesting things he put into it. It's again, just like a brilliant piece that stands the test of time. Last Light, the piece of the Blood Angel up at the Tyranids, like rising up, like the sort of, coming up and having killed all the other Blood Angels, and the jump pack Blood Angel, Sanguinary Guard or whatever, like jumping away and shooting, and it's this massive like swarm of Tyranids. I don't remember when he did that, but that's like Last Light is again a career defining piece. I mean, I think it took him like 600 hours. There's more, but there's a selection. I mean, I could keep going, right? Like, there are things that are just stunning and inspire me constantly. You think about those career defining pieces, they're amazing. And you're only going to do a few of them in your whole lifetime. You can't hold yourself to that standard every time or you'll go crazy. They're those pieces that you do that are so invested in emotion. They're so impressive that you just nail something and they resonate. Okay. All right. So I'll probably call it there. Let me look over these questions. Can you show us photos of your armies? Yes, I have videos of my armies up. I have a playlist called Armies on Parade where I've taken pictures of most of my armies and put them into a video and then talk through what I like about them. There's a couple newer armies I haven't done yet. Like I haven't done my Daughters of Cain yet, but I think I've done everything else current up to this point. Sheer, can I do a tutorial on sheer fabric? Yep, that is planned. I've just been waiting to find the right figure to do it on. It's tough because it's a very subtle effect, so I need something that's actually scaled at the level where I can do it. But I have one planned, actually. I think it'll be fun. Matthias says, tell us something about the multicolored train behind you. No. It is a secret. And then Joseph Unger says, you ever seen any Gundam dioramas? I have, and they're all I like a lot of those. Those are really cool, especially when they do like neat stuff with weathering on those Gundams. Okay, so with that, I think we got to call it there. Faraday, I saw you dropped your question about showing paint translucent skin and internal organs. That is a complicated question. That would probably require its own tutorial, but if you drop it down in the comments once this video posts, I'll do my best to answer your question afterward. Okay? But there we go, folks. I hope that all helped. We went a little long, but that's okay. It was fun. I hope that it was a lot of good answers. I'm certainly thankful for everybody who asked all these wonderful questions and for watching. I hope these are helpful. We do these, like I said, at least once a month. I try to always make sure we get at least one in every month. I would like to do more, and I will do more. Follow me on Twitter if you want to know when these are coming. So at Warhammer Weekly, I generally announce them a few hours in advance. I don't know I'm going to be able to do them until the day. I try to do it on a Saturday in the middle of the month, but here we are. You know, life is life, right? And doing live things like this, it's not always, I have to make sure the schedule works out. But so follow me there and you'll see when I post up about it. I'm generally going to post in the morning of the Saturday. They'll always be on Saturdays. And I'll generally post up that morning and then post again a few minutes before we go live. But there you go. I super hope these are helpful. As always, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have more questions, drop them down in the comments. But as always, we'll see you next time.